Firstly, warm welcome to everybody who's here today. We hope you will enjoy this webinar. And because our time is very limited, I would like to just immediately just give you a bit of background, but then hand over to Dr. Nimal. I'd just like to give you some housekeeping rules for this webinar. Firstly, it's 1 hour time we have today for this discussion. Just to let you know that we are recording this event and we will make it available through our website. We would ask you, if you have questions, to please utilize the Q&A function, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen. And that should have an upvoting facility. So if you see a question that you agree with, please utilize that, because that way we can prioritize the questions. Even if English is not your first language, please do not let that stop you from asking any questions. I'm sure we will find a way to respond. And of course, we will find the best possible way to answer as many of your questions as possible, depending on how many questions we get. If we do not get around to answering your question, please don't be offended. We just do the best that we can. So I hope that's all clear, and without further ado, really, I'd like to hand over to Dr. Nimal to introduce this webinar. So over to you, Doctor.
Yeah. Good evening. I think it's evening in Sri Lanka. So I'm Dr. Priyankarage. I'm a nutritionist, and I am at the moment I'm working as a registrar of animal feed. I think we warmly welcome all the attendees to the webinar series, the One Health Roadmap series. So this is the first webinar under the One Health Roadmap series under the GCRF One Health Poultry program. So Sri Lanka is also hope to contribute the Sustainable Sri Lanka in 2030 vision and strategic part. I think Mr. Dan introduced just say about the housekeeping notes. So with that welcome, I introduce Professor Ruini to brief out the objectives of one of the One Health Poultry Hub. So Professor Ruini is a national coordinator of the One Health Poultry Hub, Sri Lanka, and she is a professor in Veterinary Public Health, University of Peradeniya. Professor Ruini, over to you.
Good evening, everyone, and good afternoon for people joining from UK. First, let me thank Professor Kalupahana, an entire group of One Health Poultry Hub for inviting me for this important presentation. Thank you very much. And let me share my screens quickly and then start my... Hang on a second.
Dr. Susil, do you need any help?
I think you have to stop screen share. Is anyone sharing the screen? So I can't share the screen right now.
I don't think anyone else is sharing, but I have your slides here. I'm happy to screen them for you as agreed. Would that be the best option?
Yeah, so let me try one. All right.
Yes, we can see your slides.
All right, thank you very much. Right, good evening again. And what I'm going to do today is the poultry outlook of Sri Lanka. I'm going to share information about the poultry industry in Sri Lanka and the challenges we face in last couple of years and the challenges ahead for us to come out of that recession. How long would the recovery takes? I'm going to talk about a bit of all these things. And the poultry industry in Sri Lanka, as we know, is a highly organized sector in Sri Lanka. It maintains fairly high standards, a lot of private investments, not unlike in dairy. Government mainly facilitate trade and involve in policy and regulation, and the private investment is taken care of. However, this industry is relatively import dependent, but with reasonable value addition. I will discuss that later, and also generates significant revenue to the government as tax. Roughly, if I say, from each kilo of chicken under current market prices, the government gets about 233 rupees, and for egg, they get 6. If you work out the numbers, you can see the amount of revenue generated to the government. Let's look at some background information. Some extracts from Central Bank report, which is very important to understand the economic situation in the country. If you look at the annual GDP growth over the last 5 years, and for the GDP calculation, Central Bank uses 2015 as a base year, and compared to that, you can see in 2018, most of the things have a positive growth. But when it comes to 2020 and especially 22, most have negative growth, and in fact, our economy was contracted by 7.8%. And if you take the GDP, current GDP is about 7.1 billion US dollars in compared to 88.5 in 2021. You can understand why we call it is contracted. But if you take that in rupee terms, you will see it looks like we have a growth, but our currency is so depreciated, so it is not a growth at all. What matters is per capita GDP, that is per person per year. In 2022, we have 3,470 odd, but in 5 years before 2018, we had much higher. So that explains little. And then let's look at the agriculture contribution to the national GDP. So agriculture contribute about 8.7. Way back, maybe we have 20 odd %, but now it is 8.7 into single digits. But it doesn't mean that agriculture is doing very badly, but that's because of the development of other sectors, especially services, as well as industries. If you look at the, if you take the breakdown of agriculture, and rice is our staple food, we eat about 115 or 113 kilograms per person per year, so which contributes about 1.1. Vegetable does the same as well. But let's take a look at the animal production. That is contributing 1% to the total GDP. That is more than 10-12% of total agriculture. That is important. If you go back to your school days, I think one of the questions that is not missing in our question papers is what are the major exports of Sri Lanka? We quickly say tea, rubber, and coconut. Just compare tea, it is only 0.8, but this is primary production. It is 0.8 compared to livestock 1%. And coconut is same, coconut with other palm oils, and rubber is far behind. So that's something to happy about. Let's take a look at the livestock, the contribution to agriculture GDP. In your left-hand side, hope you can see my pointer. You can see over the years from 2010 up to now, contribution of livestock to agriculture GDP is, the proportion is in rice. So that's a good news for livestock. But let's, dissect and see what livestock actually contribute most to the national GDP. That is by far chicken and eggs. If you add these two together, it is about 0.79 of total GDP. That is quite close to tea, which is 0.8%. And compared to that, we pump all the investment, government investment into dairy. The dairy contribute 0.16, just for your contribution, just for your comparison. And if you take the total GDP in the country, it is like 24,147 billions. If you work out based on these numbers, chicken and eggs contribute about 195 billion. That's quite a lot. And let's understand the chicken production chain. And in Sri Lanka, we have 3 grandparent farms to produce broilers. And then from that, we produce 85% of the requirement of parents. And from then, commercial chicks to produce chicken. The good thing is 85% of the local demand is met by these grandparents. That's why chicken industry is not that vulnerable, because we have grandparents. We can stand for long even when there is restrictions. Let's take egg production chain in sharp contrast. Egg production is slightly different, may not be as organized as the chicken, but a lot more organized than any other livestock subsectors. And we don't have grandparents, but we import parents, roughly about 80,000 birds every year. But that is not very consistent. But according to our past experience, if you do import 80,000 as a replacement, and you don't go to a glut, and also you don't, the excessive demand will be not there as well. But last 2 years that was disturbed. So rely on 100% imported parents. That is a slight concern. And for the same reason, so we are vulnerable to certain changes. Just background information. because now the situation is quite different, but I take pre-pandemic numbers to explain the certain situations. Let's look at the per capita chicken consumption in Sri Lanka. Compared to some other countries in the region, we are far behind compared to Thailand, Malaysia, Myanmar, and Japan in the Asian region. But compared to some other countries, major countries in South Asia, we are far better than India, Pakistan, or Bangladesh. And per capita consumption, the numbers have come down now, but if you look at 2020, so our numbers are not too bad. Every individual had access to an egg once in every 3 days. That is not too bad, but we need lot more than that. But that was the demand for. But yet again, if you compare that with numbers in other countries, so there are a lot of way to improve that. The one important thing, comparing the significance of chicken in Sri Lanka, if you take the proportion of chicken out of total meat you consume, this is the numbers for the entire world average. Out of 41, the world consume only 14 kilograms of chicken. And developed countries, 40 out of 69. In developing countries, it's not much different either. 12 out of 31. So slightly more chicken. But if you look at the Sri Lanka, 11 out of 13.5. That means most of our animal protein requirement is coming from locally produced chicken. Something to the cheer about. Let's look at the impact of pandemic and economic recession on poultry sector and challenges ahead. So there were serious supply chain disruptions due to pandemic, a lot of lockdowns and various other reasons. We had, a lot of supply chain disruptions, and then there are a lot of geopolitical issues impacted as well. War in Ukraine, so shipping lines was disturbed. And then we ran into a severe recession in Sri Lanka, and we had a lot of forex shortage. We didn't have money to import inputs that is necessary to run the industries. So, and import restriction and restricted input, mainly feed raw materials, chicks, drugs, spare parts, even spare parts, equipment, that's had a lot of effect on the industry. And then we had to rely on the local supply, but unfortunately we had a severe issue with the fertilizer supply, and we went for organic agriculture fairly quickly. Maybe shouldn't have done, but then exacerbated the situation further. And then inflation, we had a galloping rates of inflation for a period of time. Now it is settling down in Sri Lanka quite happily, but then fuel shortages, energy issues, the people struggle with all these. And then for financing, high interest rates as well. Let's look at the impact on the poultry population. As you can see, there is a clear reduction in poultry numbers. But if you dissect that into layer and broilers, the sharp decline is in the layer, but not in the broilers. There is a reduction, but that was not, perhaps because the investors they have good cash flows, they are very strong, and also we had GPs as well. But if you see the numbers, there are certain numbers you're going to be alarmed about. One is the layer parents numbers are quite low than expected and compared to previous years as well. And so this is not probably over yet, but recovery will take time. But I believe chicken, the meat sector will recover much more quickly. And let's look at the impact on the chicken production, and you can see and the forecast published by the Department of animal production as well, but it is not rosy for year 2023 as well. Further reduction is expected, but I personally believe the chicken will, quickly recover. And let's look at the layer sector and the pullet production for commercial chicks to produce table eggs. And you can see this graph. As I mentioned earlier, we usually import 80,000 parents every year, but that is, if you look at the number in 2022, and that is a lot lesser. We are talking about 34,000, and see the number of pullet produced compared to 2021, it was, the half of that. And the estimate for 2023 is not very good either. So I think layer sector will take time, and that is same, the case is same for the egg productions as well. So our current per capita is maybe 93 eggs per day compared to 120 in 2020. Then the feed production, very important. That is the largest single cost of poultry production, which accounts to more than 70 to 80%. And sourcing raw material is the biggest challenge. I will discuss that quickly. Mainly corn, soy. Our diets are mainly corn, soy based, but use a lot of rice and rice byproducts as well. Let's see the poultry feed production. The commercial feed production, the handles fairly higher volumes, proprietary feed, and mainly broiler is dependent on commercial production. But when it comes to layer, you have certain amount of commercial production, significant proportion, but lot is done by custom mixed feed. That's why I don't have a slide to show that. If you add these two together at any given time, I think feed requirement for layer is slightly higher than the broiler. Let's see, the key challenges, and you can, the inflation hit everything, and so is feed prices, raw material prices. You can see very sharp increase in the raw material prices as well as feed prices from 21 to 22. So that was the serious issue we face, and that is a major deterrent to the growth of this industry as well. And let's look at that inflation hits commodities as well. One is due to various reasons I described before. Then the production was dropped or reduced, and people didn't want to place chicks because it is very volatile. Price fluctuates very quickly as well. And then chicken prices and egg prices went up. Although average numbers suggest this, we have gone much beyond that. So that was, the negative impact. But now I can see some silver lines. The inflation is coming to single digits, and also chicken and, feed prices are coming down. Import restrictions are relaxed a bit. So hopefully we will be in a recovery path. The major challenges is finding the required feed for the industry. Let's take numbers from 2022. So at that time, the industry was, doing very well, although not doing well. But before that, department do the forecasting. According to the forecast in 2022, we were expecting 1.4 million metric tons of poultry feed. For that, this is the breakdown. If you look at, I have taken a typical poultry feeds where 66% is, or 60 to 65 is cereals and 25% is protein. And based on that, so we need 900,000 metric tons if we are expecting a recovery to the, the past levels. 900,000 metric tons of cereals is quite a big challenge because we don't produce that. You need to source that either as maize, rice, or any other imported inputs. So that's challenging. And then proteins is even gloomier. Unfortunately, we don't produce a lot of protein meals in Sri Lanka, and we depend heavily on imports. So we are talking about 300 to 350,000 metric tons of the protein meals. So just to give you what we produce in locally, maize we produce, rice we produce, but we use some rice as well. But you can see compared to 2021, maize production has dropped down by nearly half. So that is, but if you look at the soya beans, so we are talking about 350,000 metric tons, we produce 3,000. So it's if there are restriction, that will kill industries. And quickly look at that is the case with this is published by Agriculture Department. They do the crop forecast. This is the forecast. They say 435. And when they finally settle that in 2021, it is less than half. So you got to be very careful about that as well. Our strength and challenges to export, I think we need to sustain, we need to export. There are challenges and we have strength as well. One is Sri Lanka is historically free from HPAI, which is a huge positive advantage. And thank you very much for the department and vets working and all other staff working for that in academia and various parts. And then we have a fairly high quality standards. And then after COVID, the productions went down in various parts, and then you have swine fever or African swine fever outbreaks in China. So create a lot of opportunity to export as well. But the greatest challenge we have is our cost of production is high, probably one of the highest in the Asia and probably in the world as well. And then we have important restrictions government should seriously consider about. And then we need to have some favorable trade agreements if you have to export. So my key considerations, I think at any cost, these price control mechanisms they introduce ad hocly has to be stopped if you attract any investment for poultry sector. I think it is government must have taken this for certain reasons to probably to protect consumers, but I believe that will have a serious negative impact on the industry. I think that has to be stopped. And also that can artificially create demand for commodities and also that operates black market. And availability of main raw materials is a key. Restrictions definitely will damage expansion. And if you look at the value additions, just before the pandemic, we produce about 150 billion worth of goods and spend 35 billion to import. That is not a bad value addition, even if you compare with apparels, one of our major exports. And healthy competition, but efficiency has to go up. That is paramount. All right, thank you very much. Sorry, I think I took 1 minute extra. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Susil. I think you almost covered every aspect of the poultry production. So you covered the population statistics, the feed raw materials, and the strengths and our weaknesses, as well as in Sri Lanka, the future challenges in the poultry industry. I think that now we have a limited time for the question and answers. So before going to that, I think Dan, we would like to see the results of our first poll. So so what is the opinion of the commercial poultry industry? 35% contribute as a very important to the national economy and food security. 26% requires adjustment to national policies and regulation. 10% says it depends on the imported poultry feed ingredients. 5% says it is not a priority for Sri Lanka going forward. So 19% said all of the above options are important, and the 5% is none of the above options are important. So thank you so much for your poll. And Dr. Susil, I think, are you ready for the question and answers? So we have limited time.
I do.
Yes, we have limited time, so we can go to the question and answer. So audience, you can ask questions. There are number of questions in the chat, the question and answer box as well. So before going to question and answer box, so I think the audience can answer any questions from the Dr. Susil Silva. Thank you. So you can start question and question from
I think
Dr.
Nimal, some in Q&A, you can take.
Yes, some in Q&A. Before going to that, I think there are some, we can give audience to ask questions. So any questions? So I think if there is no questions, we can go for the question and answer chat box. I think from Kushani Akshala asking, is chicken safe to eat? Dr. Susil?
Yeah, absolutely. No, this is the safest food in I think I'm sure she's asking about the chicken produced in Sri Lanka. I think my moderator is in charge of the regulatory affairs. I can't say no, definitely. I was part of regulatory procedures initially as a head of VRI and head of regulatory laboratory in Sri Lanka. And also I was the member of feed advisory committee and also involved in regulatory procedures up to last year in government. Yes, chicken is quite safe in Sri Lanka. And as a nutritionist, I know most of the food hazards are coming through feed. Our feed is very safe. And if you see the numbers and the everything, feed contains, we have removed ban using any antibiotics in feed from 2017. We used some growth promotive antibiotics in the past, but there have been the certain issues raised by media. I don't think without any scientific backing. I can remember people were worried about arsenic in chicken. A few years ago there were headlines in papers, but then we went and analyzed all the samples and from the scientists who shared as well. So there was one sample that was above the limit, but even that one, their worry was liver content just over 2000 parts per billion, which is the regulatory limit of FDA as well as European Union. But so our per capita consumption of chicken liver is 300 grams per person per year. I think generally, frankly speaking, I was part of some of the research projects carried out by the university. We have a PhD student working on drug residues, mycotoxins, and some other heavy metals as well. So I think I believe, looking at those numbers, our chicken is perfectly safe. And our standards are pretty high as well. All the producers strictly stick to those standards. There can be one or two samples which are, which is not in compliance, but that is, that is not in for reason to stop eating chicken. Chicken is quite good compared to many other. Thank you.
Think, Susil, I think Kushani thinking about the usage of hormones in chicken. So you can answer that question also.
Yeah, I didn't see that. Yes, if the question is hormones, I will say 0 hormones in chicken, because one hormone, say for example, it is if it is growth hormones are polypeptides or proteins. You can't feed them in diets, and so that will be digested. So you have to inject hormones to chickens, which is impractical in broiler or layers, one. And then there are no preparation to be used in animals. You have to use human preparation. Then you may have to sell your chickens at, maybe 10,000 rupees a kilo. But same times, I can't see any advantage of using hormones, and scientific evidence suggests the hormones produced using humans has no value in animals. Thank you.
Yeah, I think Susil, the hormones, I think we have to use peptide hormones or the steroids. So they are impractical to use in poultry production. Anyway, thank you, Susil.
I think about 50 years ago, use of hormone was allowed. I think one of the reasons why people think birds are injected with hormones or fed with hormones is the faster growth rate. 35-40 gram chicken becomes 2 kilos in 30 days. That is, mainly due to the genetic improvement over the years. It is not even genetic modification. It is simple genetic selection. Thank you.
Yeah, I think there is a Dr. Palika is raises her hand. Dr. Palika, I think you can ask the question now. Dr. Palika?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Dr. Susil?
Yes, yes, I can.
You told the feed is the major restriction for cost of production and the chicken production. So are there any other alternative ingredient other than maize and the rice and rice byproducts to use for animal feed, that means poultry feed?
Yeah, when I say 900,000 metric tons, I was careful not to say maize. Cereals, any cereals is forthcoming, but unfortunately, what we have to look, to move forward, we have to, we have to reduce the import dependence. If you look at the cereal situation in Sri Lanka, we are a rice growing country. We have a lot of rice grown for human consumption, but there are surplus rice can go to animals. And maize is the second largest commodity. If we don't have wheat, we don't grow wheat, we don't grow triticale, we don't grow barley, we don't grow sorghum. Those are the alternatives. Unfortunately, alternative raw materials, we don't have even what we have with the maize and rice. That's a slight concern. But and the issue with maize cultivation in Sri Lanka in 2008, our productivity was 8 to 9 metric tons per hectare. Now it is 3.7. So where is that going? If you use the same land now at that productivity, we don't need any other alternatives.
Okay, Susil, I think, do we need to stop 7 o'clock? There are number of questions there. Dan, is it possible to go beyond 1 hour?
We can go slightly beyond. It's up to your discretion as the chair of this,
So
this webinar.
there are some important questions I can see. Dr. Susil, the Roshana asks about, are we self-sufficient in chicken and eggs?
Are we self-sufficient in chicken and eggs? I would say no. But I would say we are demand sufficient, but I am not quite sure about the egg right now because we import as well and the demand is so high, prices are going up. But when it comes to chicken, if you go back to pre-pandemic time, definitely we were demand sufficient at current market price, but I don't call it self-sufficient. If the chicken is available at 100 rupees, a lot more people will eat, and then I don't know how do you distinguish these two. For safe side, I would say we are demand sufficient.
Yeah, and there is another question. I think we can go all the questions quickly. Isn't the cost of poultry feed impact to decrease in poultry production?
Yes, one of the deterrents is the cost of feed, because that is the largest cost component of the poultry operation. If your cost of feed is 80% of the entire operation, that cost definitely has an impact. To stop, the reason why our feed is expensive, I would say, since we don't have, the quality local production. And number two is restriction. If you restrict imports and limit it to certain period of time, and that during that window of time, we may not have the best cost advantage. If you say you can import whatever the raw materials you need, then you can import when the prices are low, our forex drain is lesser, and the prices will be low, our industry will be competitive. And then instead, what we do is we put restriction and then say for a small window, now you are allowed to import, limited amount of, so that will not create a very good business environment. I think that is, as bad as anything else. So you're going to be, yes, but I agree. Now, when you are in a recession, economic recession, your currency is not doing very well, and your currency is devalued, and then in rupee terms, the prices are soaring high. So that is definitely a question. Cost of feed will determine our growth of the industry. You're absolutely right.
Thank you, Susil. I think there is another question, not from the Sandak, from Tusita. So he is asking about the infectious diseases. I think this is not the right place to answer that question, because we are not focusing about the disease situation, particularly focusing on viral disease and the overall AMR situation. I think we skip that question because we are concerning about the poultry production and everything.
If you want, I can quickly give not about diseases, but there is a disease situation right now. There are high mortality in broilers, not only here in Sri Lanka, but in India as well. I heard 40% of the Indian broiler, have like 15% mortality, which is, something. We have IBH, but IBH is a secondary consequence of I'm sure, Tusita, you can ask more questions from Ruani later. So I'm not a specialist of that. AMR, I think, yes. I think One Health Poultry Hub will answer that later.
Yeah, I think we can go through the questions as quick as possible. Gamini Pereira asking about, what is your opinion about price controls? Is chicken unaffordable to ordinary consumers? Yes.
I think probably I answered partly. The price controls can be very damaging. But the morally for the governments, when the prices are going very high, government may have to intervene as well. But all the time, when you have price restriction, when you have to sell your commodity much lower than cost of production, why do you want to invest? You can't attract investments that will, damage the industrial growth. I think good example is eggs. If we had waited a bit longer, instead of imposing a control price, it may have gone to, the prices may have gone to 60 rupees, 70 rupees. But with that price attraction, a lot of people place chickens or chicks, pullets, and by now we may have increased the volumes, and then the prices would have settled maybe at 30 rupees, much lower than what we buy now. So definitely damaging, but industry also has to be reasonable when it comes to pricing. But the problem is when you have so much demand with less supply, it is inevitable price will go up. But if you stop that by force, and then black market operates, somebody will take from the genuine seller and sell it at black market for higher price when there is a demand. I think demand issue or supply issue has to be addressed with demand and supply as well, not by restriction. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the Mutumini is asking, what are the DAPH or the government strategies to overcome increased cost of feed? So I think you also involved in you also in the feed advisory committee, because it is not nice me to answer that questions. You better answer, Susil.
Yeah. I think it's I was there for 30 years. Now I have left DAPH, and now if I, the things I didn't do for last 30 years, I don't want to tell you now. I think DAPH is doing a lot of work. Moderator can answer more than me.
I think we are encouraging people to, we are giving some tax concessions to the import raw materials. We are allowing feed manufacturers to import maize, and I think there are a number of steps we are taken to reduce the cost of production. So with that, I think we can say in future there is a cost of production. So that Dr. Udar is asking, what is the potential of increase the availability of feed raw materials in Sri Lanka? I think the question is more similar to Palika's questions. So you can ask Susil answer.
I think one is, for me, it is simply a personal opinion. One is, it is not worth trying to be self-sufficient in each and everything. So you can produce what you can produce, balance can, and also you can produce what you are capable of. One commodity is rice. I think if we can identify a rice variety, and if we can produce more rice, now, the industry is not allowed to use rice, some restrictions, but if they can freely use rice, where we traditionally are very capable of producing rice, and maize, I don't think we are doing very bad. But the problem of price restriction and import restriction is, then local farmers, they don't have to be competitive. They can grow maize. They know they produce less. They can get a very high price. Even your inefficiencies can be covered. So that's why you have to be competitive. I think if imports are allowed, they have to be competitive. Then they will go back to the same productivity they had in 2008. I think we can grow, and then with same limited land, we can produce what is required.
I think, Susil, we have a time limitation. I think we can take one final questions. So do you think the current government policies are favorable to the poultry industry? Dr. Chamari Kannangari is asking. So that is the final questions. We can't go further. So you can quickly answer for that.
I think some are absolutely not. Sorry, I was part of government as well, but I have to say, so that is not only now, even for last 30 years, we have been fighting against this. One is restriction and other one is control prices. I think, we should facilitate the trade, but, as government, but let's talk about myself as government official 3 years ago. I knew what we do in Department of Animal Production and Health. But if you ask me to run a farm, I'll be an utter failure. But I sit in government and ask farmers to do how to do farming and how to do business, which I am not good at. I think that is not fair. So I think, but I'm sure government also has certain obligation to public, and there must be reasons. But as an individual, my opinion is policy has to change to support and facilitate these industries, not to the damage. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susil. I think your presentation, your way of answering answering for the questions. So it seems that you are very well known about the poultry industry. So anyway, thank you for your presentation and everything. I also would like to thank all the technical teams and the audience, panelists, and everybody that who contribute to success this program. And I think there is a poll 2 also. You have to answer that poll 2 also to achieve sustainable poultry production in Sri Lanka. Your view, adjustment to national policies and regulations to ensure that local production can be sustained are required. Local alternative feeds resources are required to reduce imports. It's not a priority for Sri Lanka going forward. All the above options are important. None of the above options are important. So with that poll, we are going to wind up the session. Okay. Thank you so much for everyone to join this, and a speaker and the technical team and everybody. Thank you so much. I think we are going to wind up the session. Thank you, Mr. Dan. Dan, is it okay?
Yes, Dr. Priyankarage. Thanks for your moderation. I've just put the poll results on the screen. It's been a bit short. We haven't all been able to reply, but clearly, by some distance, the most common response was that adjustments to national policies and regulations to ensure that local production can be sustained seems to be the priority. So I found this a very interesting discussion, but Dr. Priyankarage, back over to you to conclude and close the webinar.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dan. I think, are you going to give the results of the second poll as well?
Oh dear, I'm sorry. It should be on your screen.
Yes.
I thought I had done that.
So you can see the second poll as well, that to achieve sustainable poultry production in Sri Lanka, the 58% says adjustment to national policies and regulations are required. And 18% says local alternative feed sources are required to reduce the cost of production. So the 3%, the very minute level, says it is not a priority for Sri Lanka going forward. But when you heard about the Dr. Susil's presentation, it says how the poultry contribute to the GDP. So 21% says all of the above options are important, and none says the none of the above points are important. Thank you so much. And we are going to wind up. Before going to that, the wind up the session. So I also would like to invite you. There is a program in tomorrow, second webinar on global overview of the role of semi-intensive and extensive poultry in achieving food and nutrition security. I think Dr. Renuka Jayatis is going to present that webinar. So you can join it to 3 p.m. onwards in Sri Lankan time. So thank you so much, everybody. Have a good day. Good night in Sri Lankan time. Thank you so much again.